Northern Ireland, and in the streets of Belfast, British troops still stand guard to keep the peace between Catholics and Protestants. If the troops weren't there, the situation could soon erupt once again into the sort of communal violence which a year ago reduced these children to tears in the arms of their hysterical mothers. It's commonly accepted that Northern Ireland's problems are the result of its religious divisions, which are themselves embedded some 300 years back in the province's history. But it's no longer so certain that religious hatred is the only flame that keeps Northern Ireland on the boil. Poverty and squalor, which affect Catholics and Protestants alike, are now being more clearly seen as important factors in the situation. Belfast, the capital, has 500,000 inhabitants, and many of them live in houses like these, with no inside lavatory, no bath and no hot water. Many are rotten with damp, and some were classified as unfit for human habitation half a century ago. Rents in Belfast are low, because they have to be. A workman here earns on average £4 a week less than his counterpart in England, although the cost of living is just as high. In a textile industry, a semi-skilled worker, say a man who oils these machines, gets just over £12 for a 40-hour week. Tommy Madden used to work in a mill, but gave it up because he found he had to work overtime almost every day of the week in order to get a living wage. He now reckons he's lucky because as a street sweeper, he has up to £13 a week, clear of all deductions on which to support his wife and child. It's not important whether Tommy Madden is Catholic or Protestant. Like the other people who appear in this report, his most urgent day-to-day problems are not so much religious as economic. On a building site, labourers like Patrick McIntyre take home £12 a week, but bad weather can halve their income. For a man with a wife and 4 children, a bad winter can be disastrous. In fact, Patrick McIntyre can consider himself lucky he has at least got a job. There's a higher rate of unemployment in Belfast than in any other major city in the United Kingdom. Sam Johnson was a truck driver, but he's been out of work for a year. Married with 3 children, he spends his days looking for a job. Unemployment in Northern Ireland as a whole is around 7%, or more than double the rate for the United Kingdom. As far as Sam Johnson's concerned, this simply means that when he goes out looking for a job, he prays that he'll get it, but knows in his heart that he probably won't. Sam Johnson spends a long time just walking the streets on the chance that he'll meet somebody who may know where there's a job. But even if he does get a tip-off, the vacancy is often 2 or 3 days old and has already been filled. And so Sam Johnson, like 11,000 others, ends up every week in the Belfast Labour Exchange.
Samuel Johnson. Samuel Johnson. Mr. Johnson? Yes. Have a seat, sir. Two children or three children?
Three children.
Well, have you got a P64, man? That's for your earnings-related supplement.
No.
You haven't got that.
Northern Ireland needs to create at least 6,000 new jobs a year simply in order to keep pace with the drift from the land and the decay of old industries. New industries are being attracted by remarkably generous grants and tax incentives from the government, but it still doesn't look as if the 6,000 job target will be reached this year. Sam Johnson, like most men, would rather work than receive unemployment benefit. The state wholeheartedly agrees and has set up legislation which makes it impossible for a man to receive more in benefits than he would if he were working. It sounds fair, but in practice it means that the very poorly paid, and in Northern Ireland there are many of them, live below the poverty line, whether they're working or not. For many years, Mrs. Macmillan, her husband and their 5 children have lived below the poverty line. Without enough money to go round, the marriage has been placed under severe strain. Apart from having separated once from her husband, Mrs. Macmillan has suffered a nervous breakdown and 2 attempts at suicide. For housewives like her, shopping means a painstaking search through the cut-price supermarkets. The choice is always restricted to what she needs rather than what she would like. Mr. Macmillan has had chronic bronchitis for 9 years, and for most of that time he's been out of work. In a situation where it takes a fit man all his time to find a job, invalids like Mr. Macmillan can't even begin to compete. His illness is aggravated by the abysmal conditions he lives in, and the worse his health gets, the less capable he is of earning the money which might improve his lot.
Get up there, Martin. Come on, get up there.
For the children, Mr. Macmillan's unemployment means few toys and cheap ones at that. A family outing, such as a day by the sea, is an impossible dream. Mr. Macmillan tries to make it up to them the best way he can by spending his small amount of pocket money on them. Amazingly enough, they seem happy, playful children full of high spirits. Most of the food that comes into the household goes to the children. Mr. and Mrs. Macmillan try to maintain a reasonable diet, but they admit they're not getting the food they really need. James Henry and his wife live on a pension of less than £9 a week. For them, life is a vicious circle. Each Monday, so that he and his wife can eat, Mr. Henry is forced to pawn his radio. On Thursday, pension day, he gets his radio back. Mr. Henry says that the radio means more to him than food. Music is his only pleasure.
Morning, Mr. Henry.
Good morning.
It's a nice morning, isn't it?
Coming to see you again.
Oh, indeed. How's your wife this morning?
Oh, sure. Good morning.
That's good. You tell her I'll be back to you for you, won't you?
I can do that. No, it's all left now, don't I?
Yeah. Pardon?
blows the snow away, it's not so bad.
It is. £8.15 and 6, Mr. Henry. Right? One, two, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, £8.10. Thank you very much.
Good morning, Mr. Henry.
Good morning, Carl.
That's a bad day.
Oh, lovely. It's good morning for you with ducks.
Each Thursday, the pawnbroker gives back the radio, but it costs Mr. Henry 32 shillings and 3 pence. The 30 shillings he
31
borrowed,
6.
plus 2 shillings and 3 pence
32.
interest. 2 and 3 pence
£2.
lost every week.
There's your transistor. Thank you very much.
Right. Yeah.
Tell the wife I was asking for her.
Okay.
Thank you now.
All alone. Roads full of houses. Never home.
Mrs. Henry can't hear the music. She's deaf and dumb. But music is Mr. Henry's only comfort. He knows that come next Monday the radio will be back in pawn, and for 3 days he'll live in silence.
To the moon. Parks full of motors, painted green.
A life of unremitting hardship and deprivation has bred in Mr. Henry a hopeless resignation. He's got nothing out of life and has long since given up hoping for anything. He thinks it's silly to bring children into the kind of world he knows. He says he'll probably die soon and he doesn't mind. At least there'll be peace and quiet in the grave. Every night when they go to bed, Mr. Henry leads his wife upstairs by the light of a single candle. Their bedroom is cold and damp. They can't heat it because the fireplace has been boarded up as part of the general makeshift repairs to the house.
Oh, what did you say? Where's camera?
A few streets away, Mrs. Ditty, mother of 10 children, lives on the poverty line in a house that is literally falling down. It's true that Mrs. Ditty's case is among the worst, but well over half of all houses in Northern Ireland were built before the last war, and many are now in need of urgent repairs. Those families who were bombed out of their houses during the trouble last August have either been given new homes or had their own houses repaired at no cost to themselves. But in the worst areas of Belfast, there's scarcely any difference between houses wrecked in the troubles and those suffering from natural decay. Mrs. Ditty was once a tenant in this house, but her landlord is now dead, and until someone claims the house, she has to pay the rates. And because she pays the rates, the corporation says she's not eligible for a council house. She's no longer their responsibility. Mrs. Ditty's had her name on the waiting list for a council house for 10 years and was once told she was a priority case. She can't understand why she's suddenly no longer entitled to one. She's now got no alternative but to go on coping as best she can in dreadfully overcrowded conditions.
Come here, quick, quick.
The only way the family can live together in this one room is by sitting down and watching TV. They have a coin in the slot set, costing a minimum of 19 shillings a week. After 3 years, it'll be theirs, but by then they'll have paid twice the retail price, nearly £150 for a £75 set.
Mommy, can I go out?
Yes, and don't below. Yes, and don't below.
When there's no money left to put in the television, the children go out into the streets to play. And in this street, 2 years ago, Mrs. Ditty's youngest boy, aged 2.5, was run over by a milk van and killed. The tragedy of her son's death has told on Mrs. Ditty's nerves. Every time she hears a car in the street, she rushes out to look for the children. She'd like to keep them close to her, but with 9 of them and only 1 room, it's impossible. There's a lot of traffic in the street outside, but there's simply nowhere else for the children to play.
Geraldine! Elizabeth! Agnes!
Mrs. Ditty and 8 of her children all sleep in the same room. Every evening, their eldest daughter puts the younger girls to bed while Mrs. Ditty goes to visit her husband in hospital with TB.
Come on, Beth.
At the moment, most of Mrs. Ditty's children are too young to appreciate the extent of their deprivation. They regard sleeping 3 or 4 to a bed as more like fun than inconvenience. But it's clearly an attitude that can't last for many more years. As they grow up, they're going to realize more and more the limitations of their surroundings.
Good night, Beth. Good night, Agnes. Good night, Jerry. Good night, Lynn.
Some of the older houses in Belfast are at last being pulled down, 30,000 within the next 16 years. Many of the people who used to live in houses already demolished now live up the road in new housing estates, and there they face a new set of problems. Although their living conditions are immeasurably better, their income is the same, and newer houses mean higher rents. These women are picketing the rent collector to protest against a new increase in council rents, which makes them 5 times higher than rents in the old areas. Both Catholics and Protestants live on estates like this. Demonstrations in which Catholics and Protestants unite are all too rare in Northern Ireland today, but this is one. Here, Catholic and Protestant tenants, faced with eviction, take to the streets in protest against rents they cannot pay. Since the riots last August, the government of Northern Ireland has promised better housing, more jobs and less poverty. But for people living on the poverty line, these promises come too late. The women know that the rent collector is not the real villain, but good-natured protest could become violent. If Belfast Corporation tries to evict these tenants for refusing to pay the rent increase, it might well be confronted by Catholics and Protestants on the same side of the barricade. Faced with this, the corporation may have to climb down, for in Northern Ireland today, the alternative is violence.